engaged the KICTANet community in as a way of just multi-stakeholder engagement. And Commissioner Kasait, we are very glad that you have actually, you're already embracing multi-stakeholderism. So KICTANet is a multi-stakeholder platform. 1 minute, I forgot to switch on my camera. So KICTANet is a multi-stakeholder platform for people and institutions interested in ICT policy. We act as a think tank that catalyzes policy reforms in the ICT sector, and we are guided by 4 pillars. One is policy advocacy, stakeholder engagement, capacity building, and research. KICTANet's guiding philosophy encourages synergies for ICT policy-related activities and initiatives. We therefore, as a network, provide that mechanism and a framework for continuing cooperation and collaboration in ICT matters among the industry, technical community, media development partners, the government, and others who are interested in ICT policy and regulation. So in line with today's meeting, we want to recognize that the Data Protection Commissioner, Commissioner Immaculate Kasait, has since assuming office in November 2020, overseen a raft of progressive developments. This is what we look forward to hearing about all these developments, and as a way of creating awareness, as a way of letting you know what the office is doing or what has done. So we appreciate that. So the objectives, the main objective of today is really, again, to promote that multi-stakeholder engagement of ICT stakeholders on privacy and data protection in Kenya, and again, to identify and build consensus on priority actions and strategies to support the ODPC and I guess ICT stakeholders, so that we promote awareness, we promote greater privacy, we promote the understanding of what is required in terms of data protection in 2022. And of course, we hope that by the end of this meeting, we are going to have an engaged, we look forward to having an engaged ICT stakeholders on privacy and data protection in Kenya. And again, we also hope from the stakeholders that, we'll make suggestions that will support the ODPC and ICT stakeholders to promote that greater privacy and data protection. And this is a learning process. I need to say that I had an engagement with the commissioner recently. And one of the things I learned is that, we keep complaining about leaving our IDs in buildings or our data being collected by guards in buildings. And she said, it's actually a requirement because it's a security requirement, because that data need to be, to be stored. And so what the commissioner pointed out is that what needs to happen is then to determine what amount of data then should you leave at the entrance of a building, and she raised the fact that sometimes she agreed that sometimes the data collected is too much. Some people want to ask you about your mother, where did you go to school? And so these are all the exciting stuff we look forward to hearing from her. Kivuva, I will request that for people to indicate, we are quite a number, already 43. I think what we could do is at least indicate in brackets where your name is, the organization, so the organization you represent, so that at least it's clear for the speakers, and so that they also tune in their presentations to actually address some of the stakeholders who are in the call. So Kivuva, please project the program. Okay, so we have actually started on time, and we hope to finish this program latest 11:30. So we have the first session, which is the welcome and introduction. And I need to say that this webinar is also a collaboration with the UK Digital Access Program. And, you know, we look forward to having Nicole. She may not have, she had indicated she'd be late, but Charles Juma is in the call and can actually speak on behalf. And then we'll go to the keynote address where the data commissioner will speak to us. After that, I'm hoping that, you know, Commissioner Immaculate will be able to just respond to a few questions if they are there. And then we'll go on to the panel discussion where we'll be discussing priorities and actions for the ICT sector from the different sectors. So we have representation from civil society, from the fintech, basically people who deal with a lot of data. We have from, you know, representation from the service providers, and then we have academia, and finally we have somebody else also, you know, representing, I think, academia stroke KPMG. And then we'll have a plenary session moderated by Professor Sylvia Kangara. And then we will do a way forward by Victor Capio, and then we will close. So that's it. I just want now at this point to invite, I don't know if Nicole has managed, but if not, then Charles Juma, I would like to invite you to speak on behalf of UK DAP program. And I, you know, again, I forgot to say, you know, I will look forward to very stimulating discussions. Asante. Charles?
Thank you, Grace. I hope, Grace, you can hear me.
Yes, you're clear. You're
Hi,
loud.
Grace.
Hi, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Thank you. I'm trying to put on my video. I'm using my phone, so I don't know how it's coming out. Okay. Nice to, good to be here. I hope you guys can hear me very well. My name is Charles Juma. As Grace has indicated, I am the Digital Access Program Manager and Advisor at the British High Commission. I'm here on behalf of my colleague, Nicole Gregory, who is one of the counselors at the British High Commission, responsible for science, technology, and innovation. She conveys her apologies for being late, but she will join at some point for sure. So I'll read out her opening remarks for this event, acknowledging the presence of the director, the data commissioner, Madam Immaculate Kasait, and all invited guests and panelists. So good morning to everyone. Welcome to today's Thought Leadership Forum. The UK government and Digital Access Program is delighted to be able to sponsor this event today to enable discussions of this important set of issues. Privacy and data protection is something that all countries need to increasingly reflect on. And as the UK government set out in our own national data strategy, we believe that data is a huge strategic asset and a driving force of modern economies like Kenya. We want to unlock the power of data to drive innovation and boost our economy, to improve public service, delivery and support scientific progress. To do this, we believe we need agile and adaptable data protection laws and a strong independent body to uphold information rights. One which puts the protection of people's personal data at the center of our regime. Without public trust, we risk missing out on the benefits a society powered by inclusive and responsible data use has to offer. And far from being a barrier to innovation or trade, we know that regulatory certainty and high data protection standards allow businesses and consumers to thrive. To get this right, it is important that we engage in a multiple stakeholder discussions to identify and build consensus on priority actions and strategies to increase awareness of data rights and continue to shape data protection regulations. This is what today is all about. I look forward to hearing the discussion and hopefully coming out with some good recommendations, which we can consider as we continue to work together with the Office of the Data Protection Commission and others to promote data privacy and data protection in Kenya. Asanteni sana and karibuni nyote. Over.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Charles, for those remarks. As I guess on behalf of KICTANet, I need to say that we appreciate the collaboration and we look forward to continued engagement and working together. Now, at this point, I want to move the session now to our guest of honor and, welcome Commissioner Immaculate Kasait. She really does not, anyone in this sector knows what, how has at some point maybe engaged with her. So I do not think that she needs elaborate introduction. However, Commissioner Kasait, you can say something about yourself and then we welcome you to give the keynote address. Karibu.
Thank you, Grace. It's always a pleasure to be part of the sector, and I'm very happy to be here, invited by KICTANet, part of the thought process. I want to acknowledge Nicole Gregory, of course, Charles on his behalf, being present here today, and of course KICTANet, and the role it plays in terms of this sector, of just thinking through what are the issues in as far as ICT is concerned. I don't have much to say about myself, other than I'm a data commissioner, and the sector of data protection is something that I am passionate about. And today I'm here to just basically, I know it's an area that majority on this call have already interacted with us one way or another, but it doesn't harm to highlight some of the issues. I have a PowerPoint presentation. In the PowerPoint presentation, I'll make a presentation in terms of contextualizing who we are, what we have done, and perhaps looking into the future in terms of where we are going as an institution. This comes in the context of the data protection regulations. So that this is the first opportunity we have in terms of having a conversation around the regulations or any questions that might arise. Quickly, on the next slide, just to set pace as usual, that's the content of the presentation, the introduction, the overview, the mandate, the principles, obligation. I may not go through this because these are thought process people. So some of these things you already have internalized. The next slide. Contextualizing Vision 2030, it doesn't harm to just reiterate that from a policy perspective as a country and what helps us in terms of planning, it's of course Vision 2030 and beyond the three pillars, which are economic, social, and political, ICT is seen as an enabler, and we are positioned in the ICT sector. So as a critical driver to enable Kenya achieve its socio-economic development. Next. Some of you are involved in I see some people on the call who are involved in the Kenya Digital Economic Blueprint Development, which was a collaborative initiative between the Ministry of ICT and our CS, Joe Musheru, and the private sector, which was launched in Rwanda, of course. So these are things that you're already familiar with, the digital government, why we need government services digitalized, digital business. And we've seen a growth, especially during COVID. We are beginning to see, we saw an increase in terms of how people do business. We see more people, less people going into shops and more people actually ordering things online. We saw a growth in terms of transaction, money transaction. Of course, issues around infrastructure. Some of you on the call are involved in infrastructure in one way or another. Innovation and innovation-driven entrepreneurship, and of course, digital skills and values. And under digital skills and values, the Ministry of ICT has invested in this through the Ajira program, and of course, also in the ICT authority, where they have a cohort of 100 of several interns attached to different governments. So all these pillars contribute to the digital Kenya Digital Economic Blueprint. And of course, on the extreme left, you have the upper side, you have the policy and regulatory framework. We also have the emerging trends and data. As you can see, all this put together, we are working towards an integrated ecosystem, a green ICT and security, and data being a cross-cutting issue. The thinking then was that we have to come up with a framework that then protects, put to the center of digital economy being data. And that is how come in the next slide, of course, the enactment of the Data Protection Act, which also some of you on this call participated in. I'm sure you are consulted in as far as the Data Protection Act is concerned. There was a lot of feedback and involvement of the private sector in terms of coming up with the Data Protection Act. Of course, the office coming into place in November 2020. And after that's when we came into office. We are slightly, say, 14 months now from in office. And so the act basically, if we just refresh our memories, it's a framework for the rights to privacy as it applies to personal data. The emphasis here is the Constitution recognizes the right to privacy. The practices, and therefore, as you collect data, process, store it, you're expected to put in place safeguards and make sure that the principles under the Data Protection Act are embraced. And also of significance is, of course, the Act shifts the control from institutions to the data subject. That is why you hear a lot of the rights of the data subject and so on and so forth. Just as a refresher, because many of you have interacted with us in one way or another, in terms of our mandate, we are responsible for regulating the processing of personal data, ensuring that once you process it, when you're processing it, whether it's collection, storage, disposal, it's in accordance to Section 25 of the Act. We protect the privacy of individual, establishment of the legal. I'll talk about the establishment of the legal and institutional mechanism to protect personal data, provide data subject to the remedies that are necessary for purposes of protecting the functions, enforcement and implementation. We are a regulator, therefore, in terms of enforcing adherence to the Act is our responsibility. Two, we are responsible for data control, the registration of data controller and data processors. And you may just highlight that the data protection regulations were gazetted on 14th of January. All data controllers and data processors are expected to register with the Office of the Data Commissioner by 14th of July. Oversight, of course, as a regulator, we're also supposed to be giving oversight in terms of implementation of the Data Protection Act, promote self-regulation, given the vast, because even from the panelists here, we've seen digital, we've seen fintechs, telecoms, we have seen people in consultancy, I mean, different people. Given the diversity in issues around data protection, I think one of the core principles is promoting self-regulation. Of course, we are also responsible for conducting assessment, conducting investigation, creating awareness, conducting inspection, international cooperation, research, and any other duty. Just quickly in terms of in the last 12, 13, 14, 15 months or so, what have we been able to achieve as an office? One is to facilitate the rollout of Huduma number. 2, we have policy so far in SOP, standard operating procedure. A draft service charter, we haven't completed it yet because without populating of the staff establishment, you need the people to actually do the work. So that's pending, but we have a draft. ICT strategy and policy. We recognize that this is a highly ICT-centric institution because we are, please go back to the slide, I'm not done. ICT institution, and therefore would be required to make sure that as we work, we have as framework that govern our ICT, and therefore we came up with what we call an ICT strategy and policy. We also have a code of conduct which we are able to share with the institution, in this case EACC, which is tasked with issues around code of conduct. On human resource, we have the approved organization structure, career guideline, approval of grading and salary structure. Also, we are in the process of populating our organizational structure. We expect that once we populate our organization structure, the institution will be fully operational in terms of making sure we have the necessary human resources to be able to conduct our work. Regulations, 3 set of draft regulations. They are no longer draft, they are basically in force. The guidance notes, we have guidance notes which found it themselves also in the draft regulation. We have the data protection impact assessment. And the data protection impact assessment is supposed to guide institutions in terms of how they conduct audits before they embark on a high risk process. Informed consent, we went at length to explain what informed consent is. And to some extent, this was misunderstood, but we have tried to explain that informed consent is not only consent is not just the only reason why you can process data. We also have, it's one of the 7 other reasons. Processing data for electoral purposes, we came up with this as a guidance note, given the outcry last year on political parties issue, people finding themselves in the political parties they did not ascribe to. When we did our own initial assessment, we realized it's coming from a background of where information was shared out of the responsibility of the institutions that had that information for purposes on a legal purpose. We found the best way possible is to, 1, give a guidance note, 2, work with the registrar of political parties, and all the complaints, 300 of them then that we had received were resolved. And then also they added what we call an opt-out, and they also now have now in short code, and they also have what we call a privacy notice, where they explain why they collect the information, what it is used for, and how it will be disposed. Also the data training curriculum developed in collaboration in KSG. It's one of the areas we look forward to getting additional funding so that we're able to take more people there. We trained our first cohort from across government. There has been a bit of interest on that issue. Financial mobilization, we had 250 million allocated in 2021, 2022. This was a big jump from the initial budget, which was 24 million. We developed a framework for conducting periodic audit. We have a framework for complaints handling. Awareness remains one of our biggest priority. Of course, this is one of the areas that would require a lot of resources. We managed to do a 1-week campaign in partnership with different organizations in leading up to the Data Privacy Week. It's something we believe more can happen. It's one of the things in terms of our priorities that we see ourselves engaging in more, and also requesting for partnership in terms of awareness creation. On international cooperation, we've joined 2 organizations. One is on the Common Trend Network. We are members. And of course, the other one is the African Network of Data Protection Authority. Those are the two networks. So in a nutshell, these are some of the things we've been able to do in the last 14 months. It is nowhere near what is expected of us. It's just the starting point and a long road to what we'd call to changing the culture of the institution. I also forgot to add that we launched our strategic plan. That is also one of the achievements that we have had this 13 months. On the data protection regulations, which were tabled in Parliament and more or less have come into force. We have the Data Protection General Regulations, and under the Data Protection General Regulation, this, of course, they set out the procedure for enforcement of the rights and of the data subject, as well as elaborating the duties and obligation of the data controllers and data processors. Just to talk a bit more, because we are speaking to, allow me to reach out to my part of the regulation, because I'm speaking to people in industry and thought process. One of the things that we foresee in the coming days, in as far as this is concerned, besides the awareness creation, because it's important for people to appreciate what the regulations are. On those general regulations, we will be looking towards beyond the regulation, coming up with sector-specific guidelines. The other things that we will be working towards, of course, is looking at transfer of personal data outside Kenya. We'll be giving additional notes in terms of that, or giving some framework in terms of guiding people on that particular issue. The second one is on complaints and enforcement regulation. On complaints and enforcement, the regulations are, of course, they outline the complaints and enforcement provision for the data commissioner and data controllers and data processors. To facilitate this process also, we are in the process of developing an alternative dispute resolution framework. It is funded by UNDP. They are already a team of consultants working on it. At an appropriate time, we will request that you help us validate that. And the reason why we have picked alternative dispute resolution framework is because in the Act, one of the things that is recognized is ADR, mediation and conciliation. And we believe that that will be the best way of resolving matters out of court, so that we are able to actually build some sort of synergy in as far as this is concerned. So that we will be calling upon you in the coming month or so to come into a validation workshop to help us validate the alternative dispute resolution framework. On data protection registration, we have sets out the procedure that we will adopt as an office in terms of registration. And based on feedback, I have to say that we were able to review the fee downwards for registration. One, I've already said, the other thing is I've already said that data controllers and processors will be required to register from 14th of July. That's when 6 months lapse. We've had many inquiries in terms of this. I want to state that we have not yet started registration. We are working on an enterprise system which will help automate that process. Again, we'll call upon you for purposes of testing, so that we are able to test by the time we get towards the deadline. At least we are ready for you for purposes of registration. The regulations, if you look at the schedule 3, schedule 1, it section 4, it gives a guideline in terms of some of the fee. Sorry, so schedule 2 gives the guidelines in terms of the fee for registration for micro and small media data controllers and processors, media data controller and processors. So that is on registration. it's important that we do familiarize ourselves, even as we work towards simplifying these regulations so that people are able to appreciate what is in it, for what it contains. It's important that you familiarize yourself on the regulations. I would also want to add that given the complexity, the diversity of the different industry, my office is considering coming up with a framework once gazetted, which could help us adopt a Nigerian model of getting other institutions which are accredited or sought to be able to conduct some activities on behalf of the Commission, whether it is inspection or not inspection, sorry, audit or training. That's an area we are considering, and we will come back to you when we take to our CS the Gazette notice. So for purposes of conversation around that, we believe that is also an opportunity for those who are in that area of consultancy. Next. I'm speaking to industry. I don't know whether I need to go into this detail of this, but just for our own reminder, we remember there are principles of data protection, which are under section 25. Arguably, some of the things that you need to begin to appreciate. Again, this is an area that we, as part of awareness creation, will be able to unbundle what lawfulness, fairness, and transparency means when it comes to the principle of data protection, what purpose limitation is. It's an area we will be having small presentation on this, what data minimization is, what accuracy is, storage limitation, integrity, and confidentiality and accountability. So those are basically the key principles that should inform your work as data controllers, data processors, or people consulting in this field. Obligations of data controllers and data processors. There you are, but of course I've talked about registration. The other obligations, of course, is processing activity must be lawful, legal, and the data subject rights are paramount. Like I said, the shifting of responsibility, and then privacy by design and default is also important. The next slide, of course, is on duty to notify the rights of a data subject. Today, if a data subject talks to you and they want to access their personal data, it's important to actually give them access to their personal data. If they come to you and say they actually would like a restricted processing of the information, they have a right to that. They can also object to you processing their personal data. They also have a right to rectification. Data portability, they can ask for your information to move it from business A to business B. That is a right provided for under the Act. And they also have a right for erasure. Of course, the right for erasure is not absolute. It is also governed by perhaps other laws or principles within or guidelines within the organization. And that is why in your data privacy, notice, you should then therefore explain to the data subject why you collect the information, what it is used for, how long it's kept. That way, when you're faced with a situation of data subject demanding for their rights to be fulfilled, you'll be able to explain to them. It's important as you embark on your work also to remember the pursuant to section 29 of the Act, the duty to notify the data subject. And it's important to, and this you could also put it back to your privacy notice, why the right of the data subject, why you're collecting the information, the intended purpose, will you be sharing it with a third party, contacts of the data controller and data subject, processors, and the safeguards that you have put in place. Next slide. Yeah, lawful processing. This is what I was saying. We went at length to explain consent because we felt that is one of the issues that was not properly clarified in the Act. Nonetheless, and we have told this to people who seek inquiry from us, consent is not the only reason for lawful processing of personal data. The processing of personal data could be as a result of public interest, because sometimes people under the misconception, if I don't give my consent, that my information cannot be processed. Yet, if it's a public interest, information can be processed without your consent. If it's, of course, compliance with the legal obligation, or if it's a legitimate interest. But as a data controller, you need, or processor, you need to be able to unbundle what is your legitimate interest when you're processing personal data. Protection of vital interests. The other one could be for historical purposes, statistical purposes, journalistic purposes, because at times this has been an argument. Can somebody disclose my information when, and yet they're doing investigative journalism? That is one of the lawful purpose, literature or scientific research. And of course, for contractual obligations. Next slide. On data protection by design and by default, Section 41 provides for data controllers and data processors. They have duty to implement the principles, as I said, safeguards, and ensure that, that the personal data necessary for each specific purpose is processed, that you have to ensure that the data is done in accordance by default or by design. Data localization is the other thing I'd like to just quickly touch on. On data localization is one of the things that maybe some people are familiar or are not familiar. Just to refer you again to the data localization clause under Section 50 of the Act and Regulation 26, 1A and B and 2C. It's basically for strategic interests that you are expected to process the data in Kenya or for any strategic reason, or store at least one copy of the concerned personal data in a data center located in Kenya. Next. Of course, the other one is data transfer, which might touch on you also. When it comes to transferring of personal data, you have to prove that they are appropriate safeguard with the respective, with the respect to the security and protection of personal data. We have to prove that there is a commensurate data protection laws, and processing of sensitive personal data out of the Kenya shall only be effected upon obtaining consent of the data subject and on obtaining, of course, a confirmation of appropriate safeguard. This is one of the things as an office will be looking at, because there's a requirement by the data commissioner to give approval. Yeah, next. I've spoken at length on the data protection impact assessment. I would want to urge us that in the event that you know that there are issues, you're embarking on any high-risk project, just embark on a data protection impact assessment. Please make sure you're not caught off guard, because you're supposed to submit that to this office 60 days prior to commencement of the activity. Of course, this is supposed to help you mitigate your risks and is also used as a tool for decision making. That is, in a nutshell, for us, what we see for those. I'm sure many organizations have already started this journey, but from our viewpoint, this is just a highlight. It's not cast in stone. What would your compliance journey look like? Knowing where your data is, defining whether you're a data controller or data processors, because you have different responsibilities. Of course, policy, coming up with policy, identifying your risk, coming up with the compliance requirements, of course, awareness, and of course, conducting audits. What are the opportunities in terms of industry? One is systems audit and assessment, IT security, compliance, training. There is an opportunity for data protection officers in certification. I have said that we are considering adopting a Nigerian model to accredit people who can also help us in this. So be on the lookout for that. I want to end there and thank you very much, Grace. I pass on the baton to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Commissioner Immaculate Kasait, for that very well articulated presentation. We are doing it virtually, so we'll only clap virtually. I believe you can take 2 questions. There are at least 2 questions.
Yes.
All right. So there's one from Hezron Gikanga. And what he says, I'll just read how it is. A quick query from my end to the Data Commissioner. The regulations were gazetted and sent to the National Assembly, and the time given for this has lapsed. A, has the Committee House approved this as drafted? B, were there any changes? C, if these regulations were passed, when do they effectively take effect? And of course, he says he looks forward to your response. There is also a second question. I suggest I read both of them, and then when you respond, you just respond at once, right?
Yes, yes.
Oh, all right. There's one from Meshach Masibo, and he says, I have two questions. One of the achievements listed by ODPC touches on the Huduma number rollout. Did the office perform the data protection impact assessment as ordered by the court late last year? If yes, was the report made public? Will it be made public? Secondly, are there any preemptive safeguards that the ODPC has put in place in light of the electioneering period that is ahead of us, specifically in tackling the question of data transparency that arose during the last elections, either through collaboration with IEBC or in its own capacity? Yeah, so I'll hand that over to you, Commissioner Immaculate. But even before you do that, I want to acknowledge the presence of Nicole Gregory from, you had actually acknowledged her before, in her absence, but here she is. Welcome, Nicole. Charles already made your remarks, but I think we'll still give you half a minute to say something. We also want to welcome Vincent Omwenga from Strathmore University. I think, he's part of the team that has been working with your office. So you're just in familiar territory. Over to you, yeah.
Yeah, through the British government, Strathmore assisted us in coming with our strategic plan, and we are very grateful for that opportunity, for having that opportunity to work with them. Yeah, Nicole, before you came and acknowledge, it's good to have you on this call. I also want to say Nicole is very savvy in terms of data protection. That's her area of expertise. Interesting questions, and thank you for that. I said we will always be here to seek clarification. One, there hasn't been changes. There should be an official communication anytime about the regulations that have been passed by Parliament. There hasn't been any changes from what we shared with the Parliament, and according to the procedure, actually, there's supposed to be no change. They have an option of rejecting or adopting in total. Like I have been saying earlier, because I remember I've had several sessions from American Chamber of Commerce. We had another one, I think, and they were asking when are the regulations going to come to place, given that it has an effect on business. And I said then we had a pre-publication meeting with Parliament that helps clarify some of the issues. So there has been no change. And like I said, unfortunately, when it comes to these regulations, we did not have a lead, it was not the GDPR. The act came into force immediately. However, as an office, recognizing some of the challenges, what we've been trying to do is to create awareness and also walk the journey of compliance. That's why every time I have a conversation, I keep saying compliance, compliance, compliance. So there is no, they basically come into effect immediately. For registration from July this year is when everyone is supposed to register. That is from Hezron. For Michael, I want to clarify our work is regulatory framework, and our work, when we say we help in terms of rollout, is giving advisories. When we had several meetings and also give advisories to the Huduma Secretariat in terms of their work. To the data protection impact assessment, they did the data protection impact assessment as directed by the court. and it's in accordance to as guided by the Act. On the issue of preemptive safeguards in as far as elections is concerned, we did one of the preemptive, because we were trying as much as possible not to be reactive. We came up with the guidance notes, and the guidance note was published quite a while back, actually, sometime in September or August. I'm not quite sure about the date. And the idea around coming up with a guidance note was to guide election. If you saw in some of our achievements, we say that is one of the things we came as an office. That's one of the proactive ways of coming up with the guidance, so that you're able to guide industry or the relevant institutions in terms of how they conduct their business. So we gave a guidance note, and the idea was to look at the election, anyone affected by elections, political parties, IBC, CSOs that are involved in collecting data or working around elections, but collect personal data. So that is one of the proactive measures. The other thing, completely understanding that you're in an electioneering period, we are scheduled to have a meeting with the IBC. We requested for a meeting because, as part of proactiveness, because like I said, I keep saying I don't know whether it is appropriate to use that word, but nonetheless I'll use it. My journey to Damascus came when one day we walked into a meeting, and everyone, it was a meeting both mostly public institution. And as soon as we made our presentation on data protection, there was almost close to pandemonium and panic in the room, because everybody was saying, this is so complex. What does this mean for us? How can we make sure this is working? It's at that point we realized it's not enough to just begin issuing threats and sticks around without working with people the compliance journey. It's when we changed our strategy and thought awareness creation, and also going to Kenya School of Government, so that we are able to expose as many government institutions as possible, so that they're able to appreciate data protection. After all, some of the biggest data controllers and holders are actually government institutions. And that is how come our collaboration with Kenya School of Government started. In my presentation, I said that we have had training for the first cohort with additional resources, and that is one of the areas we look into in terms of partnership. We should be able to get more people to be able to go to Kenya School of Government, hopefully before we actually begin the registration process, so that institutions are able to appreciate what data privacy is about. So that is one of the areas. The second one, of course, is awareness. I cannot sit here and say it's adequate in no way. Our prayer is that it's an area we can partner with many other institutions, so that we're able to load the entire country on data privacy, data awareness. Because one of the things we have noted, that some of the inquiries we get or complaints are actually something to do with lack of awareness. People may not be aware about some of these this right they have. And therefore, because they are not aware, they don't have a culture of not sharing information. They continuously share information freely. They don't ask questions. Why are you asking for my information? How will you process it? But you see, they can't ask, because we generally like to share information. When people ask you in your laundry shop, can you tell me where you live? You'll freely tell them where you live without asking, why do you need that kind of information? And isn't it too much for you? So my call, yes, in terms of, those are some of the proactive measures we are taking in terms of election. There needs to be more in terms of awareness creation. It's an area that we look forward to more partnership with the institutions like KICTANet and all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Immaculate. I know, we'd provided for a session for plenary for these discussions, but knowing that you might not be here for the full length, there's just a question here that is in line with awareness raising. So actually, to one, it says the Act and regulations provide that ODPC may be engaged when doing international transfer. Would it be more prudent to engage your office from the beginning, and if the engagement is required, and how would the engagement look like? Then will the ODPC be launching any certification for DPOs or persons overseeing compliance with the Act? So that's a question from Lenny Kamau. And the second one is from an anonymous attendee. Again, issues of data, you can already see that. And finally, I'm going to just seek your indulgence and allow Dr. Paula Musuva to ask her question. Paula? We can't hear you. Oh dear, okay. I guess, Paula, can you put your question then on the chat? Or on the Q&A? I don't know what's happening. Maybe you're having challenges with your mic. All right. Okay, Kivuva, she needs to be invited as a panelist so that she can ask her question. But in the meantime, Commissioner, in light of raising awareness, there are those have highlighted. And then, of course, the same person raises, can private sector take training at the Kenya School of Government, or it's only for government? I think that's really a key to respond to. Back to you, Commissioner.
I'll take the last one on private institution. I think it's open. We just thought initially they would give priority to public sector because that was being the largest data holders.
Mm-hmm.
I think they've sent out their first advert on when the training will take place. I just need to follow up, but I think it should be able to be attended by anyone, just like others they've held. And the reason we are partnering with Kenya School of Government, because they have the necessary infrastructure in terms of presence. And I mean, they are the ones who have that mandate for making sure that government, public officers have, when it comes to capacity or professional development on matters that affect the government. On international data transfer, I said at the beginning of my presentation, it's one of the areas that we'll be giving further guidelines. Indeed, it's a requirement that you come to the office and you get a necessary, basically like as consultation. You're free to come and ask. We've had several actually, people writing to us to seek clarification on international data transfer. And the guidelines is to make this much more transparent so that it's much more predictable, so that you know how to go about your business. So that is one of the things that we will be looking into. You'll be surprised to note in terms of technical capacity, we are quite spread. That's why at times when we are requested to be in more than one places, we may not be. It's a one-man show guitar. Literally. When we say so. So in that case, some of these things, if you say like we are trying to, some are delaying. I know there's a lot of anxiety on sector-specific guidelines. It's trying to get out as much as possible within the limited resources. It's not an excuse. And that is why I have said, coming back to the issue of certification, which is the second question of DPOs, not yet. We have not yet gotten to the extent of doing certification from DPOs. It's something we hope to do in the foreseeable future, but it's not, certainly it's not top of our priority right now. It could be second, another year or two. On certification, I have said we are not yet doing certification. Maybe what we are considering is accreditation of institutions that could help us in terms of the areas that I have highlighted, whether it is audit, because we realize the area is quite diverse. If we alone sat here and said we will do all that, it may never be possible. And that's why we are looking at possibility of working with other sectors. That to look at the systems audit assessments, compliance journey, IT security, you know, those things, training. So that is what we are looking at partnering. And that would be like a proper procurement process and would come up with specifications of who then would qualify to do that kind of work. And then I think the last one, the person did not manage to get through.
Paula, I think you have been permitted to speak now.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for this opportunity to interact. I just wanted to ask on that element of accreditation and training, because I'm coming from academia and we really are interested in partnering with you. I think you've mentioned that right now you're focusing on government. Just in terms of just how to provide that training and accreditation, that you mentioned. How does an institution go about that? An interested institution. Thank you.
Okay, and finally, this is final. Catherine Chalo, you're also allowed to speak. Okay, having challenges. Commissioner, I know we have really taken a lot of your time. Kindly, respond, and then I'll request Nicole to just say thank you before, I know you're busy, before we allow you to leave.
Okay.
Although you're more than welcome to stay.
I would love to stay. I would really love to stay, but I'll try and get back. There's somebody who can stay online just in case of any points of clarification. Paula, like I've said, what we will do, we will call out for, because this would be sort of a partnership, we would be calling out on particular elements, whether it's systems audit. We'll adopt, considering adopting a Nigerian model where we, like what NEMA does, they pre-qualify. They pre-qualify people to be able to do certain work on their behalf, like assessors. And then once we pre-qualify you, based on an agreed terms. So the agreed terms are what then we would be advertising. If you meet the threshold and criteria of the agreed terms, then you would then be working on our behalf. So that is one of the things it's still in the pipeline, like I've said. So as I sit here, I don't have the nitty-gritties of what is doing. It's something we are working on the pipeline. It's something we hope to do this quarter. Worst case scenario, the second quarter of the year. Second quarter meaning calendar. In government, this is third quarter. Third quarter or fourth quarter in government calendar. That is, when I say that, we are looking at the worst case scenario. The longest it would take would probably be June this year, because we have other things there. So once we call out that proposal, you would be making a decision on what you are, you would be stating what the qualifications are, and then people can then be part of the pre-qualified people to give that kind of a service. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Commissioner Kasaitu. We really appreciate your perspectives, your thoughts, and this really has been a learning process, and I'm sure it will open to more engagement, to more requests, to your office, to more stakeholder engagement. And I think this has been one very good presentation of awareness. Actually, the comments on the chat are quite good. People are happy with the presentation, and we can only thank you. Just before you leave, I will ask Nicole in 240 characters to say something. I think we also want to acknowledge the presence of Tom Gray from KPMG joining from London. We know it's quite early, so we appreciate your presence. Nicole?
Yeah, thank you, Grace. Thank you. Very briefly, just to extend our huge thanks to the Commissioner for joining us today. I'm so energized to hear about all the plans you have, and obviously seeing the strategic plan come alive now that you've launched it and looking ahead. We're really keen to continue to partner with you, to support you in your work. It's great to see the comments coming in and the engagement. I couldn't agree more with the discussion we've had before about the need to really focus on raising awareness, engagement, understanding of data protection, and to do that before you can start using your sticks, so to speak. So just to say again, thank you, and hopefully we will kind of get some really insightful information for the next panel discussion, and actually start to come out with some good recommendations that we can work together on. So thank you.
Okay, Commissioner, maybe I don't know whether you have some closing remarks, and then we'll let you go.
No, thank you, Grace. It's really always a great opportunity, and thank you, Nicole, to have this kind of a thought process. I believe this kind of interaction, because it's quite diverse, helps us improve our offices, help us improve our processes, help us begin just implementing the Data Protection Act. I would be happy to get feelers in terms of what kind of way forward comes out from here, and how you see the partnership with the Commission moving forward, and so that we're able, because we are here to serve Kenyans, to serve you, and like I always say, my office is open for purposes of dialogue and improving the services on data protection. Our aim, like you said, is to basically improve the culture and have a data protection privacy culture in this country. So we have people who are more empowered to share less and also not stifle innovation and also improve the policies of how business is done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And again, we look forward to welcoming you in another session. Asante sana, have a good day. At this point, I want to hand over to our session panel moderator, Professor Sylvia Kangara. Professor, I know we have taken 30 minutes of the time, which means that your panel will have less 30 minutes, but this was very important for stakeholders to actually raise their queries and engage with the data commissioner. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Grace, and KICTANet and everyone who has supported this webinar. We really thank you. And I am the moderator for the panel.
Sylvia, do you mind putting on your camera? Switch on your camera, please.
It is. You can't see me. It is on. Let me try again. Can you see me now? Do you see me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning again, everybody. I am moderating this panel and I have been instructed to manage the time really well. So forgive me if we seem to rush through it, and accept our thanks for your participation and attentiveness. So my name is Sylvia Kangara. I am an academic in law. I teach corporate finance at Strathmore Law School. And I also teach banking law and consumer protection law at Kabarak Law School. I've also taught international law and property law. And my agenda as an academic and legal practitioner is to figure out how all that fits together. And being here certainly is very exciting for me, and to meet you all. So this session that we are going to have next is a panel roundtable that is going to discuss priority actions for the ICT sector. Having heard from the Data Protection Commissioner about the priorities for the Office of the Data Protection Commission, now we turn over to the views of experts in various sectors. So what I would like to do is to ask the panelists in half a minute to introduce themselves so that you can know which sectors we have invited for this discussion, and therefore we can see how we go through this session of identifying what their priority action areas for each of their sectors are, what they think that's going to look like. So let us start with you, Elias. Kindly, in half a minute, could you introduce yourself and switch on your camera so everybody can see you?
Thanks very much, Dr. Kangara. My name is Elias Okwara, and I am the Africa Policy Manager at the digital rights organization called Access Now. It might be worth to note that I'm also a certified information privacy professional for Europe and the United States. So I've spent a great deal of time helping organizations, including Fortune 500 companies, in managing compliance, whether it's cross-border or whether it's within territorial areas.
Thank you very much, Elias. Juliet? Juliet, kindly introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Juliet Wangoi-Maina. I'm working in M-Pesa Africa on regulatory affairs and public policy. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliet. Fiona, please.
I think Fiona has not yet joined. You'll introduce her when she does.
Thank you. John?
Thank you, Sylvia. My name is John Walubengo. I am a lecturer at Multimedia University. I'm also a certified data privacy professional and consult for various companies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. We have another panelist. Do we have Vincent? Grace, is Vincent coming on board with us?
He's actually inside. He's in the call.
He's in the call, and he's the fifth
Yeah.
panelist.
Good morning. Thank you. I think I was introduced earlier, but my name is Dr. Vincent Umenga. I'm a senior lecturer at Strathmore University. I participated, as indicated earlier, in the development of the data protection strategy for the year 2022 to 2025. And I'm here to talk about really the priority areas as far as that strategy is concerned. And thank you.
Thank you, panelists. So we have various sectors: the civil society, the fintech sector, the telecom sector, when Fiona joins us, academia, IT security, as well as strategies and planning. So we thank you again, and I would like to launch into the session immediately by directing this question to the panelists and asking them to respond to this in the order in which I introduced them. So starting with you, Elias, from your sector's perspective, and I'm assuming I have tried to see what you might speak for one sector or maybe several. So from your sector's perspective, what are the 3 to 5 top priorities to promote privacy and data protection in 2022?
Thanks very much for that question, Dr. Ngara. I think one of the biggest priorities that I see on the horizon for this year and for future years is around this question of data protection by design, which the Data Protection Commissioner alluded to in her presentation, and it's found in Article 41. What exactly does it mean? As things stand right now, we have a model that was developed by Dr. Anne Kavokian, who was the Data Protection Commissioner of the province of Ontario, and that's what we have to go by, right? And there are about 7 principles that she outlined, but in addition to that, there are other principles that have been outlined by the European Data Protection Board. So I think being able to unpack what that means, particularly in the African context, and maybe there's some elements like around end-to-end security that need to be addressed a bit more, because that might mean end-to-end encryption as envisioned by the GDPR. So I think that's a major point. The other one is around cross-border transfer of data within the continent and outside, but placing priority within the continent because there's an element around industries and organizations growing and needing to transfer data across national borders. So how does that look like? Do we need as a country and as an African region to have adequacy decisions as the Europeans have, where you place an adequacy decision and say this particular country, you can be able to transfer data based on the conditions that are on the ground, where those conditions entail having data protection laws or the general laws that the country has. You know, so that's a big question, and it's interesting to have the UK government represented in this discussion, because the UK government became the first Western nation to be able to have adequacy for an African country when they placed Kenya on the future adequacy list. And that was a big deal. And that's something that needs to be really looked at and examined as a model for other relationships with European and Western nations. So that's another thing. The other thing is around the regulatory guidance. And I was happy to see the Data Protection Commissioner providing a list of some of the achievements they've done. And they've told us that they've done, provided guidance on data protection, impact assessments, and on consent, and maybe one third thing. But for me, that's not enough. A lot more needs to be done so that you're unpacking what compliance means. Data protection is a hugely complex undertaking, right? And when you look at the European Union model, where they used to have the Article 29 working group before the GDPR, and with the GDPR, they now have the European Data Protection Board, and the sole purpose is to be able to interpret the law, right? And their goal is to be able to provide clarity for organizations across different sectors so that they are able to comply with the law in its fullest consent and adhering to the spirit of the law. And what the European Data Protection Board does is that it spends a lot of time drilling into specific requirements. So they have a long discussions around consent. What does informed consent mean? How does it work in terms of sensitive data? They have a whole array of guidance. So for me, it would be encouraging the Data Protection Commissioner to have additional guidance so that we really dig deep into what data protection compliance means in the context of the Kenya Data Protection Law of 2019. And of course, for me, then one of the areas would be the data protection impact assessment. So how does it look like in the African context? And then finally, I think the last thing is around, and this is a challenge for people within my realm of full-time work, even though I also consult for various companies in the region, but within civil society, right? Within civil society, I think there's a lot more that needs to be done in terms of playing as a people's watchman on these data protection issues. When you look, for example, at the US and the EU, I was fortunate enough to be there at the height of major developments in data protection when a young lawyer called Maximilian Schrems, who was from Austria, sued the Data Protection Commissioner of Ireland and sued Facebook because they were saying that the transfer of data from Austrian citizens to Facebook violated his privacy rights under the then Data Protection Directive of 1995, and then he subsequently sued again under the General Data Protection Regulation. And what that meant, right, was that issue went all the way to the European Court of Justice, and they ruled that a mechanism that was used to transfer data from the EU to the US was invalid. And that meant that people had to go back to the drawing board. And this related a lot to the Edward Snowden revelations around signals intelligence that was being gathered by the US government through US companies. So what I'm saying in a nutshell is we need to play that role in a more stronger, in a more involved way. So we need to keep an eye on big tech, because right now, as it stands, Africa is sort of the last frontier when it comes to data collection, right? So Africa now is the area where now it's a virgin territory to be able to monetize the data. And we just don't have enough strategic mechanisms to make sure that we are keeping an eye on what's happening. And I think that also entails enhancing the capacity of the Data Protection Commissioner. I'm happy to see that they're looking at the staff and increasing the staff, but a lot more needs to be done on the outside to keep track of what's going on with big tech in particular. But of course, even with small and medium-sized enterprises, right? And these are the ones that are on the ground at the grassroots level that collect data on a continuous basis, and perhaps their practices might escape scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you, Elias. Juliet, I think you will forgive me if I say 3 to 5 minutes, please. And thank you, Elias, for that very wonderful launch of this discussion.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sylvia, and thank you, Elias. Maybe I'll just start by setting the scene. I think as coming from a fintech perspective, or financial services where a lot of the services provided are touching a lot of people, a lot of humans, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic. I think we've seen the role of mobile money or mobile platforms in alleviating risk and supporting payments. So for the first thing, I think we start in terms of priorities is to acknowledge that there is need for a stable regulatory environment that promotes innovation, growth, while also considering consumer protection. So that's where we recognize data protection as being very critical for us and for the industry. It's important that users feel safe and protected when they're using our services, when they are using these platforms. So just to allude again to our maybe second priority would be on the consumer protection and empowerment, rather consumer awareness. And I think the Immaculate referred to this or alluded to this, that there is need for awareness amongst users. It's one thing to have the act in place, it's another to be able to ensure that users can enforce their rights, are aware of their rights, and are able to apply user choice and control to their products, to their data protection. So that's very important for us, I think, even in continuing to boost the financial inclusion strategy, which would be part of our second, maybe third priority, is keeping the consumer at the center when promoting financial inclusion. We might have seen yesterday, there was the National Payments strategy launch done by the Central Bank of Kenya, and key to this is financial inclusion. Out of 99.95 or something of the sort % of retail payments, 98 of that is mobile related. So we can see just how important this is to us. So again, alluding to the fact that we do influence a lot of people, there is importance for them to feel protected and safe when using our platforms. And then maybe our third priority, or our last priority, I would say, is, making sure we are meeting the highest standards of data protection and privacy. So compliance, I think we work quite closely with the Commission to make sure that we are implementing the right processes, the right protocols, the right systems within the organization to help us meet those regulatory requirements that we have. We, of course, have a DPO and a whole data protection, consumer protection division that's looking after that, which supports both the GSM and the M-Pesa side of the business. So I'll stop there for now, and I'm looking forward to more discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliet, for your brief remarks. Let us now have Fiona. Fiona, please, 3 to 5 minutes, please. Let me go to John as we wait for Fiona. John, please proceed.
Thank you, Sylvia. Speak from academia point of view, but the things I highlight with regards to academia, actually from my consulting experience, seem to be pretty much across the board. Now, in academia, one of the, we've all been students at university level. One of the challenges that students go through is the academic transcripts. You sit for exams, you are 4th year, and you still don't have data on how you performed in 1st, 2nd, or 3rd year. Of course, you know you have passed, but when you ask for the formal document to prove as such, the universities tend to not consider it as a priority. So for academia, what this Data Protection Act is going to do is really wake them up from slumber, because the mentality that the student transcripts are property of the university is going to change into the reality that that is actually property of the student and the university is just a custodian. So that means for universities, they must rework, they must re-engineer the internal processes in order to be in a position to fulfill the data subject rights, the student rights to, for example, access their transcripts and when they need to access them. Because if they don't, the regulations empower the students to actually report those administration to the data commissioner for action. So in terms of re-engineering or revamping the university's mentality towards complying with the Data Protection Act, we shall need to very quickly come up with privacy notices. If you do a quick sample check across the, let's say, 30 public universities, you may find that a majority of them don't yet have a privacy notice. And that may also imply that internally, they also don't have a data protection policy. Perhaps they have also not thought about their data retention policy and of course, not doing impact assessments. These are the requirements of the Act that universities must begin to deal with. At the top of this is awareness and training. Both the student community and the staff may not even be aware of these implications. So a lot of training will need to be done to bring universities and generally academia up to speed with the expectations of this new law. But beyond that, and now this I speak from my consulting practice, it's one thing to have very nice documents, perfect laws and what have you. But at the end of the day, how do you get companies to implement? Including companies that are willing to implement, because data protection is not a destination. It's a journey that requires to be baked into your workflows, your daily routines. And that is really the bigger challenge. How do you get the privacy culture? How do you maintain data privacy within organizations so that you have the whole data life cycle being part and parcel of your day-to-day work rather than as an afterthought just to comply? So for me, those are the key things that will stand out from the academia point of view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. I invite everybody, now that we have quite some information on the table, to start posting any questions you might have. And now I also request Fiona to make her presentation. Thank you, Fiona, for joining us. Fiona, you're welcome. I think she's trying. I can hear a sound coming to my end, but I don't know if she's coming through.
Kivuva, are you able to help Fiona, maybe with her mic?
I've asked her to unmute, so she has to accept.
Fiona, you may proceed.
Sorry?
You may proceed to make your comments on the 3 to 5 top priorities to promote privacy and data protection in your sector in 2022.
I think Walubengo has touched on that when he went into his consultancy, when he talked about companies, because that is what I spoke, that is what I was going to say. And so I'll probably just add that one of the things that companies need to do then, in addition, is just making sure that they have clear procedures within, internal procedures, to be able to align with the regulations. And that is what I think is a top priority right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I will now request Dr. Omwenga, please, to make his remarks.
Thank you, Sylvia, for the chance, and thank you, panelists. Now I'll talk from a strategic point of view, and at the same time looking across board, the business sector, academia, and everyone else. And as I speak this, I would also want to recognize the UK aid to the DAP for the chance they gave us to do the strategy that will guide this in this country. I want to start to say, where do we start? Really want to look at the business entity, be it academia or otherwise. What must it focus as they actually try to prioritize or to comply or to ensure that data protection in 2022 is achieved? Number one, there is need to look at the strategy. Institutions or entities must ask themselves, do we have a plan in place to respond to the privacy and data protection issues? What Pengo has mentioned, notices. Viona has talked about policies. So are they in a plan? Number two, there is need to look at the people. Are the people aware of the privacy and the data protection issues? Are the people prepared in terms of the capacity? Number three, there is need to look at the processes. Are institutions having controls or structures and practices that therefore would ensure that privacy and protections are in place? Number four, is the technology right? Because we are talking about digital revolution or industrial revolution. Do we have technology that will support this, privacy and data protection? From the speaker from M-Pesa has talking about, the way in which now we are going to conduct the business, banking or transfer. Are we actually having the right technology, therefore, to support this? And therefore, having said that, these are what we call the things that one will actually want to look at. The four things, just look at. But what will be there for the priority in order to ensure we promote privacy and data protection in 2022 across board, the way I see it? The first one is awareness creation. Everyone has spoken about awareness. But the question is, what is this awareness? I will basically say there is need, therefore, to conduct internal seminars, clinics, and of course, you can invite the experts to ensure that these things are brought to the fore of employees, all the people that are working in the organization. There should be information sharing. Walpenga has talked about preaching and actually displaying these notices. The next one, which is very important that I haven't heard anyone talk about, I think was alluded to the Okwara, that there is need to review or setting up, if there isn't, institutional policies and procedures. And in this, I'm looking at it controls, because institutions may not comply if they are not going to review what is existing. So then they are in line with the new regime. That is, align policies and procedures with policies and applicable laws and regulations. The ODPC has come up with these regulations. Have we aligned our policies, the institutional policies and controls to those regulations? Because there can be a challenge. So I see that to be one of the things that the institution should do. The other thing, there is need to conduct assessment and setting up appropriate structures, capabilities, resources, and support mechanisms. In this case, I'm actually looking at, there's a talk about impact assessment, data protection impact assessment. This may appear like it has to be done by the ODPC or at organs of that nature, but I think it's important that the institutions, companies, and organizations do this at their level. And then this must be conducted in periodic manner. I think if you conduct it, then you'll get to know how effective the controls that are there are going to work. Number 4, priority area that I think is mainstreaming and integrating compliance and policy in the business operations. What's happening in this case, we want to look at organization culture, attitudes, and values. Unless this thing, people continue operating the old and there is a regime, there is going to be challenges. There is need to change the organization culture, the attitude and values by mainstreaming, therefore, and integrating these laws. Finally, there is what I will look at capacity enhancement on privacy and data protection. It's not enough to say people are aware. Making people aware is one thing, but having to give the people the ability to actually exercise is important. Here I'm looking at the implementation of privacy and data protection programs in line with the business lines. Of course, you're not going to change the business, but really you are trying to say, can I domesticate the laws within the business operations? And to do this, therefore, you will have to conduct, can we say, training, regular trainings on data privacy, so that it becomes part and parcel of the business, operations. I see those to be the priority areas in 2022 as we try to assimilate and get to be really informed about these issues of privacy and data protection. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vincent, for those very interesting highlights on across the sectors on what would be the priority issues for the ICT sector. Now, I have noted a question on the chat box, and this could go to any one of the panelists. It reads, should a data protection policy be prepared by advocates only? Should a data protection policy be prepared by advocates only? And maybe Vincent, you can take that one, because you talked at length about institutional preparedness.
Thank you. Indeed, a very interesting question. My take is no. Why? Data protection is not necessarily a legal question. It also has other facets that are not legal. And therefore, when you are coming up with a policy, you need everyone. And therefore, the advocate may draft, but then may need these other players. An advocate might not be aware of aspects which are technical in nature. Data privacy issues borders on what we call some, ICT security issues. To the extent that the lawyer may not have that knowledge, will require working with other experts to come up with a more inclusive policy. I have also talked about the attitudes and the values. This is important. The success of any law and actually any of such kind of change, because you are talking about change of way of doing things, requires a look at policies that encompass all these aspects that are human in nature and the process. And therefore, I would say no, but we need to work with others for the purposes of coming up with an inclusive, all-inclusive regulation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vincent, and thank you, Mogo Karuga, for that good question. I would like now to move to our next segment, and the next segment is that I will turn to the floor and ask what are the questions that you have for the panel. And I would also request that if you have a question that you would like to direct to a specific panelist, kindly do so and let us know who it is in the interest of time, so that they can answer it and then we can get more questions moving. And I would like to request any questions for Fiona. We could take those first.
Sylvia.
Yes, please.
There are more questions on the Q&A.
Okay, I saw one. I don't know if I'm not loading properly.
Oh, you can't see them. Maybe I can read them for you.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Okay. There's a question from Eric Otino, and he says, I had a question around artificial intelligence that has generated a lot of interest based on its intensive reliance on data mining as an intervention. Has any consideration been factored in on responsible AI within the context of data protection and privacy? And are there considerations to advance research that can inform policy and practice around responsible AI in Africa, in Kenya specifically, And I think most probably that is for the academia. Then there's a second one here. I have a question for Juliet. Beyond compliance and the regulatory environment, have Kenyan fintechs considered having a code of ethics on the use of personal data to shift fintech culture towards data protection beyond the legal bare minimum? And that is from Meshach Masibo. I guess those are the two that I see for now. Let me see if there is another one. Oh yeah, there's another one also. I don't know whether this is what has been answered by Mugo Karuga. Should a data protection policy be prepared by advocates only?
Yes, that was the one, and I think
okay.
it has
All right, then there are only those two. Thank you. Back to you, Sylvia.
Thank you so much, Grace. Panel, who would like to take the first question? Or the second, John, please.
Yeah. I could take the first one on AI. Basically, the Act actually speaks to AI. It's got a legal term they call automated processing, such that whenever a company or an organization has automated decision making in some of the applications, basically they're using AI. The law doesn't stop them from using AI, but it requires that in case those AI decisions have a legal effect or significantly can harm a data subject, then those AI modules should be able to have a human explanation. In other words, if a data subject has a complaint arising from a decision made by AI-driven software, that data subject has a right to ask that company to explain transparently how that AI logic arrived at that decision, and more importantly, if that decision can be reviewed by a human being. And if the human being arrives at the same decision that the AI logic originally made, so be it. So in a nutshell, yes, there's a general clause to address AI, but definitely there will be small nuances depending on which sector the AI module is being deployed. And to answer the last bit on research, yes, there is ongoing research around AI and ethical AI and how do we make our AI logic more transparent, especially in the face of increasingly more sophisticated AI algorithms that by design are not transparent. So it's an ongoing research area, and I'm sure we shall learn a lot from the outcome of that research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. I pose to ask if any of the other panelists would like to respond to that question as well, the one on AI. Okay.
Yeah, maybe I could also comment on the same. Indeed, as John has indicated, it is in the Act. And the Office of the Data Protection has also considered this as an important element in its strategic plan. Meaning that most of the activities, and as we know, really technology is going to change and it's changing rapidly. And it's also important to mention here that data privacy is a highly dynamic. And to the extent, therefore, there's a need to regularly conduct research. So this is an evolving area, and therefore there is a lot of research going on, and it is one of the priority areas in the strategic plan by ODPC, and institutions of AI learning are actually welcome to conduct research in this, to come up with ways in which we can have algorithms that respond to our very nature of the society that we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Off my mind, I'm just thinking, what about this, if this automated data processing is happening across borders, but with impacts within the country, what is a data subject to do in such an instance? So I'm just planting a thought there, because it really is it's a huge question that looks very complex, especially in the context of what the data commissioner talked about, of a digital business and economy, which obviously would have such components, and not just business or commerce, but other sectors as well would have to grapple with this question. Earlier on, I think maybe in the beginning 90s, there was a lot of outsourcing of data processing. I certainly know in the US and other countries, the sort of north-south business affiliations would work such that it is in the third world that data is processed and then used in the first world. How exactly would all that work if it was an automated context? So I leave that and ask about the second question. We had another, a question regarding data protection in the country, and whether we need to be bare minimum or we can do more. And I see Juliet's hands is up. Juliet, would you like to comment?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Sylvia. And maybe just to touch a little bit on the previous question, I think in addition to what John and Vincent have mentioned, I think with AI, it's huge amounts of data that is being processed. So there is room for, just applying the principles as well, looking at technical and organizational safeguards, the ability to provide awareness to users as to how their data is being used, pseudonymization, anonymization of data so that data is not identifiable. I think one of the things that would also come out of that is looking at what we'd call unintended consequences of AI or big data processing, in a sense that beyond what you're trying to achieve, what are some of the negative implications that could arise from that? So looking at the ethics of AI around the processing of that, how are we able to ensure that particular groups are not identified and targeted or discriminated against? So I just wanted to touch on that. There's been a bit of work on that, I think, even from a GSMA perspective, looking at mobile big data analytics and how these can be used in projects. So the AI for Impact report covers this a little bit and goes a little bit into some of the privacy and ethical considerations that can be applied when using AI. And then just on the next question, I'll just highlight it quickly. Have Kenyan fintechs considered having a code of ethics on the use of personal data to shift fintech towards culture of data protection beyond the legal bare minimum? I think this would be the ideal. We would, of course, be promoting and happy to see that happen. There is currently an association of fintechs within Kenya. So I believe that's something that can be pushed through that in terms of setting standards and requirements and allowing fintechs to have a point of reference when it comes to improving their approach to data protection or the data protection profile and culture. I think as, looking at mobile GSM, mobile money, we do typically try to go over and above the legal requirements, the bare minimum. We also follow some of our industry association recommendations, which are industry and international best practices, to make sure that we do provide the best level of data protection to our consumers. Thanks.
Thank you, Juliet.
Sylvia.
Yes, Grace.
Somebody is saying that your volume is so low, but there's one more question also that I would like to read. When you're ready, you can ask me to do that.
Okay, yes. My volume is maxed. Maybe it's my voice. I'll project more. And thank you for the feedback. I would like the panelists to contribute more to the second question, if any one of them would want to. Okay, then I think then we, as I invite everybody to post their reflections or to raise their hands if they would like to ask a question. It's not just questions, we could get your comments, your reflections as we try to move on towards the end of this session. So Grace, you could read the next question.
Okay, thank you. So there's a question from Charles Juma from UK Digital Access Program. And he says, this is to any panelists. How can we assure inclusivity around data privacy, especially targeting PWDs and vulnerable women, girls, and youth? How are stakeholders being intentional from the onset? Generally speaking, for the excluded populations, our youth are digitally active, but without any protection. So I think that's to any of the panelists. And then there's a comment from Venta Mongera. There's need for continuous research and sensitizing of the corporate civil society organizations, government, and the general public on the data privacy in the face of digital dispensation. I appreciate research is not cheap, but it is important. Then how can research and sensitization be a continuous process and in a sustainable way? Those are the two that are currently in the wherever. Over to you, Sylvia.
Thank you very much, Grace. So we have two of our panelists who'd like to respond to that. I see Elias and Vincent and John in that order. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for that question. And I think on the issue of people with disabilities and in excluded minorities and generally excluded populations, I think it's so important that data controllers and data processors keep privacy in mind ahead of launching particular projects. And that's why I talked about data protection by design, which is a concept that essentially says that before you undertake any particular project, you put in mind the data protection principles. But beyond that, there's an element around it being user-centric. So therefore, it should revolve around the interests and the needs of individual users and in the management of personal data. There's also an area around visibility and transparency. So you need to operate according to the stated promises and objectives subject to independent verification. So what you say on your public privacy statement should be what you're actually living up to within your practices. But beyond that, there's also an element in data protection by design, which is around full functionality, which means that you should be able to satisfy both privacy goals and your organization's legitimate interests. So you're supposed to be able to accommodate the needs of the users as well as your legitimate interests as a data controller or data processor. The other point is around embedding privacy by design, making sure that privacy or data protection is an essential component of core functionality, meaning that the user need not do anything additional other than using your service or your product, and so they'll be able to enjoy those privacy protections. And then the last two are around having privacy as a default setting. So basically making sure that personal data is automatically protected in an IT system or in a business practice, wherever the business is. And then finally, being proactive and preventative, making sure that you have early and consistent adoption of strong privacy principles. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elias. Vincent?
Thank you, Sylvia. I'll address the second question and then I'll go to the first. As far as research is concerned, and Mongera, it's important indeed, it's not, yes, research is not cheap, but in institutions of higher learning, working with private sector players, civil society, must actually find a way in which we have convergence, like we are doing today, to actually respond to the emergent needs of the society. There's certainly a lot of research that is going on. I'm aware in my university, we have actually a whole kind of center dealing with data protection and privacy. There's enormous research going on there. But then the creation of a forum to disseminate that information to the larger population requires partnership. I think this is one area that I look forward to in institutions, private, public, civil society working together to ensure that that forum is actually provided. But when I look at that, that may look at an elitist, it still stays there. There's a need now then to go to the second level, which Charles has asked. How then do we ensure that that information, that research output goes to the people with disabilities, all underserved or underrepresented, who happens to be the majority and who happen not to be within the universities or research centers? Civil societies will play a role in actually noting what are the needs in that level, then follow them through to institutions of research, so that then we have a way of, there is research and then there's a feedback going down. The other thing that I look at, how do we ensure that we are able to respond with the needs of these people to ensure that they're not left behind? One way is, which I say, an example, right now, the Act, the Data Protection Act, and all the regulations that are actually coming through are all most likely in English. That's a clear way that we have left aside those who are not likely to read this English. How do we ensure, I think institutions of higher learning certainly can actually assist in trying to break down these regulations, interpret them contextually, so then it is available even in local languages, so then the people are able to follow them through. And this can actually be done by research institutions, civil society, again, working together. I also certainly think that, again, as we are speaking here, I'm also aware we are using sound and text. Now, what about somebody who could be here who's not maybe able to read, but can actually be able to sign language? So ideally, there has to be a deliberate effort in compliance with our, constitution in inclusivity. And I think this is a debate that actually can go on, and to ensure that all these things, as we do anything that we do, we must actually have these people in the center. Thank you. That's what I would say.
Thank you very much, Vincent. And of course, it would mean that when we talk of civil society, we have to disaggregate that to focus on the civil society that, that is focused on particular vulnerable groups and not and is aware of what the needs would be. All right, so thank you. Was it John next? John, are you next? Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Sylvia. Vincent, thanks for that very elaborate response. You've run away with all my ideas, which is acceptable because we are both from academia. But just to add on research, it's an area that needs to be sort of supported, and funding is a problem, but I must appreciate some of the players here. TESPOC, KICTANet, I think they have some funding that goes into ICT related research. If we could have more people from private sector, donor communities coming on board, then it will be possible for universities to be able to do all the research that is actually required in these emerging areas. On the vulnerable groups, again, Vincent covered so well, but I could also add that one strategy is to be very targeted to enterprises that are collecting data for vulnerable groups. And then making sure that those data controllers are very aware of their obligations. An example would be like in our act, it does have a clause on how to process data for the underage of people below 18, specifically in terms of consent. How does a 13-year-old sort of express their consent? And the answer is they don't. The law is expecting that the 13-year-old has a guardian or a parent who will then consent on their behalf. And if you think about most of these mobile apps that we are throwing up into the market, do they really come with those options to enable underaged citizens to be able to onboard onto that application subject to their guardians? The answer is in most cases no. So we do have the laws to cater for the vulnerable groups. The bigger question will be whether the data controllers are, number one, aware of those laws and willing to invest in, additional modules or effort to ensure that those vulnerable groups, whether they are underaged people or they are vulnerable groups, are actually respected and provide the same data rights that the rest of us are currently enjoying. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Very, very insightful comments there and responses. Grace, do we have any new questions? Yes.
There are no new questions, but there are comments that I would like to read. Oh no, there's one question. I think, what is the comprehensive definition of the subject under the Kenya Data Protection Law? Does a company in its entirety whose profile in financial or whatever capacity is being collected and stored fall under the description of subject and protected under the same law? I think that's to do with the finance. Then there are comments here. That question was from Catherine Chalo. We have a question. We have another comment from Mugo Karuga. Thank you for organizing such platforms. They are of great help in sensitizing people on this novel issue of data protection. Is it possible to have such forums on a frequent basis? Thanks, Mugo. Then there is Eric Otieno. This is just a humble request, if possible, to share the video with participants who would like to review the valuable inputs in this forum. I think, Eric, I can respond to you right away that the video will be uploaded on the KICTANet channel, but it will also be shared on our social media handles. So be lookout for the link, but we can also ask Zambi, who is organizing this, to share the same link on email. Yeah, so that's oh, but back to you. That's what is there. Oh, just hang on, okay. No, I think that is it. You know, you can go on. Back to you, Sylvia.
Thank you very much. Before we answer the question, or I would like to request Fiona, would you like to give us a comment or respond to any of the questions? I know you are pressed on time. I can hear that same. I think Fiona needs probably to be connected again. I can hear the same sound I was hearing earlier as she's trying to speak.
I think she needs to unmute. Her microphone is still muted.
Oh yes, that's right. Fiona, you need, no, I don't know. Yeah, Fiona, would you like to unmute to make your comment? Somebody may have to call her, and as we wait for her.
She's having challenges with her equipment, I think.
I think so.
All right. So panel, we have a question on the table as we wait for Fiona. Could you please respond?
Yeah, probably I could go first. A data subject by law is basically from the relationship between, let's use layman terms, the enterprise and the customer. So the enterprise generally is the data controller. They determine the purpose for collecting information. So that's a data controller. Personal information, they determine the purpose. Why am I intending to collect your name, your email, your telephone number, among other personal identifiers? So I become the data controller because I determine the purpose and to some extent the scope of the personal data I need from you. Now you as my customer, you're considered the data subject. Basically, the person whose data is collected, the individual, so to speak, that submits their personal data in order to enjoy the service from the enterprise. So the legal term of a data subject is basically the individual who submits the information to a data controller. That's what I can say, but I'm sure the lawyers can add more to that. Thank you.
Maybe I can add something there. Thank you, John. Yes, when you look at the Act, it talks about a data subject in respect to personal. They want to say personal data. Now, the way Catherine has asked the question actually is an extension of the interpretation of that law. And I'm not a lawyer, but that is how I see it, which then now brings in what we say that a subject may be looked at as an object. And in the context of what, and now when you look at the IT and all this, it's as an object on whose data the person providing, or the entity, the object, can I use the word entity, providing the information. Therefore, this object could be a person, could be the financial company that you've talked about, because the financial company has what we can say identifiers, as John has mentioned. And to the extent, therefore, can therefore this data protection apply in its interpretation that the company is a data subject? My submission, the lawyers can actually say this, it is correct. Yes, the financial company is a data subject because they will provide identifiers, data or information that can identify them, and that information is personal to it. So that is my take as far as the word subject is concerned. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. So when you look at the Data Protection Act and the specific definition, it talks about an identified or identifiable individual. So in the ultimate sense, when you are thinking about data subjects, you are also thinking about individuals, because ultimately at this Data Protection Act, and we must keep in mind, this Data Protection Act is in pursuant of the constitutional right to privacy that is in the Bill of Rights of Kenya's 2010 constitution. So it's important to keep in mind that in the ultimate sense, the Data Protection Act is meant to protect individuals.
Yes, I think I'll also lean towards Elias. I think whereas a company is also an identity, or it has a legal identity, that legal identity of a company may not necessarily have the same weight, so to speak, as a personal or as an individual, envisioned in our constitution that says every person has a right to privacy. Also, I think the legal identity of companies and their responsibilities and obligations and rights thereof, I think, are largely covered in the Companies Act. So there's all manner of debates around there, of course, but my thinking is that when it comes to the Data Protection Act, the focus was heavily around the individual. Probably just to throw a more spanner in the works, there was the question about do the rights still exist once that individual has died? Do dead people enjoy the same privacy rights as those who are alive? And different, acts give different rights. Of course, in the Kenyan one, I think doesn't give the same rights to the dead, but I think Ghana does. If you die and Safaricom has your data, even in your death, you still enjoy those rights. Thank you. If you're in Ghana. In Kenya, I don't think you'll enjoy it.
Very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. In a case decided in 2021, October, this is a case, Republic versus Joe Mushero, that and others that challenged the rollout of Huduma number. The High Court spoke to the question of who is a data subject, not in elaborate terms, but the question there was, could a person suing in court for protection of their data rights go to the court directly without first exhausting the internal mechanisms that have been set up by the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner? Now, one of the parties that had sued was Katiba Institute. So when the ODPC say, no, you can't sue because you have not come to us first and exhausted our mechanisms, the courts upheld Katiba Institute's argument that Katiba Institute is not a data subject that could have enjoyed or that was required to follow the processes first and procedures for dispute resolution before going to court. Therefore, Katiba Institute, not being a person personal data needed to be processed through other mechanisms, could go directly to the High Court. So
because they're not individuals.
Because they're not individuals. So I would refer you to that, and I think a lot more will be said jurisprudentially about who a data subject is. So, okay, so I wanted to put my voice out as well, taking my moderator license to say something. All right, so where are we? Do you have another question? respond to, or are there any responses to that particular one? And we are really coming to the close here. We're trying to land this mission so that we say we have completed successfully.
No, but there's a comment. There's just a comment from Constantine Obuya.
Okay.
And she says, thank you, KICTANet, for organizing this platform. Sensitization has indeed begun. Good learnings on the subject of inclusivity, especially for women, youth, and PWCs. These are the excluded and marginalized groups. That's it, back to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Grace. Any other comments, questions? I will give, half a second. Maybe Juliet, would you like to give a comment on this as we hit our time mark and exit the stage?
Yeah, sure. I do think a lot of it has been covered, especially on the data subject question. I think I agree with it being an individual. I see Masi Mutindi has also put a really good definition of that in the comments. So I'm in agreement with that. And I think similarly in terms of for the deads, I believe, in principle, whether or not the law provides, is that there still requires a legal basis for processing that individual's rights. I believe that's how privacy should apply. And again, some of them will, of course, transcend that individual's privacy rights. So, for example, public interest, public policy, vital purposes. Some of those might go over and above the individual, but provided that there is that legal basis, then that should still apply. Yeah, I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Any last word from the panel? Do you have any thoughts, reflections, John?
Yes. Closing remarks. As I said earlier, the policies, the laws, the regulations are perfect, but how do we move all that into practice? And this is both for the ODPC as well as the enterprises, the institutions that are collecting personal data. It's a long journey, but it's a journey that must begin with a single step. For me, that single step is awareness. Let institutions that are collecting personal data spare some budget, get some training, and basically begin walking that journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Elias, last word?
For me, I think is to just emphasize that point about data protection by design, because it essentially accounts for data protection and privacy before the particular product or service is being implemented. But more than that, when you talk about people with disabilities, people who are excluded, minorities, they don't need to do anything additional than using your product or service. And that's the basic concept of data protection by design. So that's something that I hope that organizations will pay attention to.
Thank you very much. Vincent?
Thank you. Mine is basically the success of anything is dependent on the willingness of the parties or the subjects to the success of that which they have given to themselves. We've given ourselves good laws, but the success is going to depend on each one of us playing their roles effectively, upholding a good culture, value systems, and attitudes. So to me, those will determine how far we are likely to go as a country as far as this is concerned. And also ensuring that everyone is aware of these things, so then we actually do not operate on different wavelengths. Thank you.
Okay, my thanks to the panel for very nice closing remarks. So we are going to end now, and I'm just going to request all of us to keep working on this. When history is written, we will be recorded as pioneers, because many of these things are happening in our time, and we are the ones who are having to carry this weight. So remember that there'll be Judgment Day when future generations look back and ask, what did these people do with these questions that are really happening in our own time. So thank you very much to the panel. Thank you very much to the audience. Wonderful questions. And thank you very much to KICTANet for organizing and hosting this forum. And I would like now to turn over and hand over this to Victor Opio so that he can take us through the closing session and statements about the next steps. Victor, to you.
May I seek your indulgence, Sylvia?
Yes, please, Grace.
I think there's one, I don't know who will respond, whether it's Omwenga or, but there's one question that has come, and I think it's very important in light of what we are doing now. It says, thank you, that's from Nancy Marangu. Thank you for your presentations. I'm wondering, how can youth and children be sensitized on these laws because they comprise a large population that consumes the internet? I guess we just need one quick response from one panelist. And then it's Victor Capio, not Opio. Thanks.
Apologies. Thank you, Grace. And apologies.
Yeah, a quick remark and comment on this. On this, we can always go back to the strategy that ODPC has actually put forward. There is a whole area, a whole chapter or focus area on awareness, targeting different groups. And indeed, I'm aware of institutions who are trying to create what you call pamphlets or information notices that are specifically targeting the youth. Certainly, my university is working on something for the focusing on university students who happen to be the youth. And the same can be cascaded down such that in our formal education and also in formal education, we can actually have these topics. Remember, in our education sector, this has never been, a topic covered. But that's one way in which we can actually be able to meet the youth through education and awareness forums. And this can actually be done in a cooperative way through the Ministry of Education and other vocational institutions that are serving this country. And also, we do have corporate institutions like Safaricom. I'm not holding plea for them, but I see an opportunity in their advertisements, maybe picking a line, sharing through the social media, some talk points about data protection. That way we'll be able to reach many of the youth who happen to be in the social media. They might not be in the formal sector, but they are actually in this. That's how I look at it, that we can actually be able to reach them. So using a multi-pronged approach, not one approach can actually succeed. Thank you.
Vincent, thank you very much. Juliet?
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, I think that's completely correct. There is need, and there are initiatives to collaborate with the relevant bodies to boost this awareness. What would also encourage is, it's one thing to kind of talk to this problem and try to create that capacity, but something Vincent had also alluded to is a people, process, and technology approach to data protection, which can also be applied to awareness building. So being able to have those processes in place where the relevant people on the ground are aware of, how to treat certain individuals. Having that technology, again, for those who are perhaps PWDs or suffering from certain disabilities, and being able to link that with now the capacity building both for the users and for the employees, the representatives of the organizations. And this cuts across, I think, all entities, all sectors. That approach can really serve to bring up that level of capacity and support for those that really need it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliet. this question of digital minorities or digital marginalization is really important, because the people who have access would be the youth, maybe not so much the children. We always think if you have access, you are empowered. But in this context, access comes with certain exclusions and even vulnerabilities. So that assumption that access is empowered status is really not true in this context. Then we also must, think of PWDs because of their own unique vulnerability. It could have to do with access or perhaps not. So it is a complex question. And if you asked an elderly person whether the youth are digitally marginalized, they might say no. They are the ones who tell us what to do. We are the ones in our old age who don't have access, who don't understand the world of tech. So with those comments, I think we can end now, and we thanks again to the panel for responding. Grace, we can proceed to hand over then to Victor. Victor, I would like to hand over to you and Grace.
Yes, thank you, Professor Kangara. Thank you very much, everybody. My role is very simple. It's basically just to echo high regard for the presentations that have been shared and the intellectual contribution to shaping the privacy environment in Kenya by all of you who have spoken today, from the Data Commissioner, to Elias, to Juliet, to Fiona, to John, and Vincent, and of course, the moderator, Professor Kangara. Thank you very much. We really value your contribution to, shaping this space, and it is through ideas that society change. KICTANet continues to provide this platform for everybody to talk about issues of interest. And we believe that by having regular engagements, we're able to make privacy a reality. I think today I've had a term, privacy culture by design, over and above what we usually talk about of privacy by design. But I think we need to really work on the culture to ensure that everybody can enjoy their privacy free of any restrictions. And regardless of whatever innovations coming, then we're able to make sure that even those people who are just getting onto the internet today are able to ensure that, able to enjoy privacy without having to do anything further, even if they don't have the knowledge, but at least at the very basic level, they should have those protections in place by default. And I think that without much further ado is just to say that in terms of way forward, we are going to do a number of things. First is that the proceedings have been captured into a report, which are also going to be consolidated into a policy brief and shared with everybody, so that we all have our little Bibles with some of the commitments that we have actually made in terms of the issues that we need to prioritize. And we'll definitely look forward to reconvening again later in the year to just also appraise ourselves on how far we are going. Are we moving left or right, or are we moving forward? And also, we are going to make available this video for those who had not had the opportunity to participate in the conversation, to also capture and also be on the same page with us who are in this room. So I think I'd like to thank each one and all of you, all the attendees. If we were in a room, we'd have been clapping, but perhaps maybe you can put an emoji in the comment section just to appreciate our speakers, and show us how you're feeling, and also really thank the speakers and also the team at KICTANet who have supported to make this meeting a reality. and of course our key supporters and partners, the UK Digital Access Program. And we want to thank each one and every one of you for participating, and I wish you a very good day, and thank you very much. And let's keep talking. Our conversation continues on social media platforms, so please, as you finish, we have a small poll. Please respond to it. We'd also like to have your feedback on how this event was, and it will help us shape future events. So please make sure you respond, and yeah, thank you very much, and a good day.